It doesn't move in space. It sits in space, it absorbs space, it can be like a sponge, it can pull things to it, it sits and waits. But the problem here is that it doesn't contribute. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Dotty. I'm Trace Egan, and in today's video we're going to be looking at the different categories and types of egos that there are. So let's crack into it. Within the context of energetics, and when we're looking at life and understanding our spiritual system, our energetic system, and our system of life through the way of chi, of energy, and this overall perspective and way at looking at things, we want to be able to break down the different sorts of egos that there are. Because when we are looking at things through the lens of energetics, we always come back to this concept of the threefold being. So within the EGOIC Dotty structure, we suggest that you can use the chakras as a way to navigate your inner self, your central column and your core. You can use the auric system, the layers of your aura and your energy field, to navigate your external world and the external reality. We have this element of the 7 states of being. So that's the membrane, that's the encapsulating form. And later on within further series, the energetic series, as we're explaining the energy and the energetic constructs of the times that we're looking in and we're living in, we will be able to go into that in a little bit more detail. Different types of egos fulfill different layers of this trifold system. So the ego is that which fulfills the inner being and the core of a person. Then we have the narcissist, which correlates to the energy field, the aura on the outside, the movement of the energy field through life. The kind of toxic, egoic individual that we find within the being state, the membrane, the encapsulating capsule of what's going on, is what I refer to as the deluded donkey. Now I know that that's not a very technical term, but in all my years of looking at these archetypes and breaking these archetypes down, I really haven't been able to find a better word or a phrase, but we'll get onto that later in the video. So the deluded donkey correlates to the membrane and the larger being. Then we have the narcissist. There's 3 types of narcissism that I would identify as being the major outlays of that pattern and operational flow in the kind of current energetics grid that we're having to engage with. These are where the major problems are within our lives and our worlds at the moment. So 3 types of narcissism that we'll focus on, and then 2 types of ego, the inner being, the central core. So 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3 again. And it's this consistency of structure and pattern that has been really important to bring to bear as we're outlaying this. You know, this is not just about concepts and maybe suggestions of ways of looking at things. This is really taking the energetic system and using the formulative keystones, the foundations of the operations of the mechanics of that system, and outlaying them in a usable way for people so that we can understand what's going on. So the ego, we have 2 types of ego. The classic ego that we have really focused on for all of the series to date, really. But the other type, so I don't feel like I need to focus on that again, but the other type of ego is the passive ego. So I would suggest that the passive ego is more evolved than the classic ego. The classic ego, essentially, it doesn't want to move its energy field or its energy system in the world. The classic ego doesn't know how to work the mold of its own aura. It's afraid of its own shadow, really, and the power that's contained within that shadow, the responsibility that's contained within it, also because of all the creative potential, which is where all of the difficulties and issues stem from with the ego. Whereas when you've got a passive individual, it's more aware than your regular ego type. But what we find with the passive ego, and I don't mean passive person, I do mean passive ego, because ego is a creative being and your creative sense. The passive ego is, we consider them to be toxic or non-beneficial because the passive ego, it doesn't move in space. It sits in space, it absorbs space, it can be like a sponge, it can pull things to it, it sits and waits. But the problem here is that it doesn't contribute. It doesn't contribute towards the movement of the field, it doesn't contribute towards the movement of the flow, and it just sits and it doesn't really do anything. But yet the passive ego is always doing something internally, because the passive ego is internally clocking the things that are going on, registering them, pulling what they want, ignoring the things that they don't want to see. And I suggest that there are many times where this can be a very or unbeneficial relationship dynamic to be within. You know, if you're in a relationship with a passive ego, this is somebody who is often, they don't see themselves as really being there or being present. They're disconnected from their presence in a grounding, which is a difficulty for them to be living through for sure. But it's up to themselves, you know, if they want to engage in their personal development, their awareness of these things. We can only really do our work for ourselves, and we can suggest things for other people, and we can maybe support, but you can't do another person's work for them. So when you're in a relationship, and an ongoing relationship with a passive individual, you can really feel drained a lot. Like you're always putting in a lot of effort, you're always moving a lot of energy, and it just seems to fall on dead water, and yet it also seems to disappear and go away. So when we're talking about chi and we're talking about energy, this is why we have to highlight the passive ego as a sort of egoic type and an individual. And when we're looking at all of these types of egos, like further on down the line in more detail, this is just an overview, we'll look at ways to deal and navigate with that. Then we come into narcissism. So with the narcissism, you have the classic narcissist, you have the malignant narcissist, and then these archetypal patterns that the narcissist plays out in one inflection or the other, I suggest is also played out by and in individuals who are very codependent. Now, codependency, I suggest, has an awful lot of the roots of the causality, and the reason for this has a lot to do, I feel, with our social construct, our, you know, culture at this time, and the system, the soup of life in the world that we are in right now, what is around people when they're growing up, when they're developing, how they're moving. And so many people operate from this place of codependency because they have these difficulties in their lives and their worlds. So codependency is an issue that we want to be able to look at and deal with through energetics, and we will get to that at an appropriate time. And this is not to, you know, make anybody who is operating in this way or manner feel ostracized or, you know, like they're not doing the best that they can. Codependency can be a very difficult burden to be living with. So we will break that down in a wholeness with a sense of healing and empowerment, and we will look at that issue at an appropriate time. However, the reason that codependency is in this category is because the energetic pattern, the flow, the movement of a codependent individual is very similar to the pattern, well, it's the same pattern as, you know, a narcissist or a malignant narcissist. So we'll go through those, you know, when it's appropriate. So the word and the phrase that I have for the classic narcissist is the big baboon. Again, I know that's not like massively technical, but it really does ignite the concept, you know, in your mind's eye of what's been spoken about. Like the big baboon, you can really see them coming. Oh, look at your one. People who are narcissistic, they carry their energy here, you know. The ego doesn't carry energy at all. It tries to pull energy from here of other people. Whereas the narcissist is just plugged into their grid system very differently. They think they're great, they think they're amazing. They'll have these really grandiose thoughts of self. They don't really have a natural cap, you know, like anything is possible, everything is amazing. And it's all about the toxicity of this. We're going to have a whole series on narcissism, so I'm not going to get into it massively. I just want to make a reference to it at this point. But this is the classic narcissist, the big baboon. And again, it's all about toxic or not toxic, healthy or not healthy. You know, somebody who is like an extrovert, you might call a bit of a narcissist. not because they're narcissistic, but because of how they carry their energy. Narcissism really floods and saturates other people. The issue with the narcissist is that it doesn't see others. It doesn't perceive the energy field of anybody else but itself, and it grasps in all the nutrients for itself. So that is just like a little touchstone on the classic narcissist or the big baboon. Then when we have the malignant narcissist also seeking this area to be fulfilled and feels very pompous in this space. But the malignant narcissist, from an energetics background and perspective, doesn't share this space. The big baboon does. The big baboon loves to swim in the soup of its own soul and its own presence. Whereas the malignant narcissist can be much more graspy. It doesn't want to open. It doesn't want to share. This is when we're talking about manipulation, and very conscious manipulation, very negative, dark intentions, sees other people as pawns in a very, very bad way. I think this is where you get a certain amount of, sociopathy and other sorts of extreme disorders that we're not even touching into. But so the malignant narcissist does not want to share or hoard the resources in the way that the classic narcissist does. The malignant narcissist wants to, it's more insidious, it's more internal, and it's much more detrimental, I would say. But again, we will cover that off in the narcissism series in more detail, because I just think narcissism at this point in time is such a large topic. It's so huge, and it's really affecting an awful lot of people, because the narcissist controls the energy field, and there's a reason within the energetic system and the biomechanics of each other and how we are around each other and how our auras flow and how space moves. And this is why we educate ourselves in the energetic structure, so that we're able to deal with, integrate with these things a little bit better. And again, codependency, just to correlate those in, again, codependency is all about the energy field. And it's all about needing something or someone else to uphold you in your life and world, and the pressure that can bring. Now, obviously, of all of them, I would say that malignant narcissism is the worst. Big baboon, second worst. Codependency is almost on that peaceful spectrum of good people in a good place. So it's not a criticism, but what we are talking about is the movement and pattern of energy flow, and whether it's healthy or unhealthy, whether it's toxic and to what degree that it's toxic. Being in a relationship with a codependent person can feel extremely toxic, limiting, but often coming to that and from that with a much more open angle, with a much bigger healing perspective. So again, we'll cover that off at the right time. Finally, then, when we're talking about the different types of ego, you have what I refer to as the deluded donkey. So the deluded donkey correlates to the membrane, the space being. I think it's a representation within the macro at this time of how people are seemingly lacking an awareness of their own energetic structure. So I suggest that deluded donkeys are the representation within the kind of macro at the moment of the individuated form, the empowered sovereign energy being of an individual coming into fruition. If all of these changes are going to occur internally and therefore externally, there is a process of time. Well, time be the medium through which this process happens, but there is going to be a process of things occurring in a linear fashion, one step to another step to another step. So the deluded donkey, to my mind, is a part of this process, and it represents this great ungrounding. The reason that we call it the deluded donkey a bit no more than the big baboon, first of all, it makes it very accessible, and by having a slightly humorous term, it makes it less of a core issue. You don't want to disempower somebody, or you don't want to disrespect them, but in order to have a healthy membrane and a boundary with another person, we do need to be able to file behaviour or a situation appropriately. And we aren't responsible for other people and how they act or be in the world. We are only responsible for ourselves and maintenance and good mental hygiene and these sorts of things. The deluded donkey is essentially extremely ungrounded. They are not clued into an objective reality at all. The deluded donkey is very incapable of perceiving reality as it's really happening up here. You know, they live in their head, they live in the treetops, like they're living up on the canopy. It's not that they're not functioning, it's not that they're not contributing, it's just that their contribution has little value because it's not weighted in any sense of grounded reality. You know, like when you're around a deluded donkey, it can feel very invalidating. It's the vibrational pattern that a deluded donkey puts out there is difficult. And if you are trying to offer something solid to somebody who is like this, you're just going to be wasting energy. You're just going to be losing all of the time. Another element of things is if a deluded donkey is like having conversation with you, there's little value in that because it's not really real. You know, it's real in terms of they subjectively truly do believe that that is what is going on and that is their narrative. But again, if this is a toxic dynamic and we look back to the cornerstone, the foundational element of the ego, and that the ego lives primarily through these like illusionary narratives. And this is the thing about a deluded donkey is they're deluded. Like things that they say aren't going to come to fruition. They're not offering much value. And therefore, if you are spooling your energy in this way, or if you're caught up in a dynamic with them, or you're forced to be around them, it can be very difficult. And it's also how they affect your energy field, because they're very high vibration on one level, but that high vibration is just not grounded really into the earth plane. It's not really a part of the human system yet. And again, we'll flesh that out in more detail, but in order to understand, you know, the mechanics of the deluded donkey, we have to have more of an understanding of the energetic matrix that we operate within, the navigation of how we get through it, and some of the systems and constructs that create that energetic system. So we will get into that. But just at this point within this series on ego, I did just want to break down and overview the different types of ego and acknowledge and recognize that, you know, until we have these archetypes that we can work with, then it can be very difficult to understand what's going on in our lives and our worlds for ourselves. That's it for today's video. Thanks so much for taking the time to spend with me. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. Let me know in the comments, just because it really does help. Like the video if it's been good, because that's a good biofeedback tool, and subscribe to the channel if you think that this is going to be useful to you in your life and on your journey of time. Thanks so much. Talk to you again.